Welcome to this introductory video for Security Policy Tool. In this video we will go over the key features of our tool and get you a little more familiar with what to expect once you've downloaded our free demo. This video today will not be covering all features of Security Policy Tool, but it will give you a good idea of the flow of creating policies to then testing them. The topics we'll be looking at today are introduction of user interface, creating access control policies, and lastly, testing and verification. Alright, let's begin. Let's first explore the layout of Security Policy Tool. When you first open up our tool, you will see this welcome screen. From here you can open up previously saved projects or create new blank projects. For our purposes today, we will be starting fresh with a new project. To do so, we will simply press this button here to get started. Whenever you create a new project or open a previously saved one, this is the screen you will see. On the left here is the Policy Explorer, where you will find many of the different functions that we will be discussing in this video. On the right here, you will see this large panel that contains 3 tabs. They are Summary, Model Verification, and Access Privilege Preview. Summary gives you a breakdown of everything you've entered up until this point. And since we've started with a blank project, you'll notice that all the different fields currently contain zeros. Right now, only Action has numbers entered, and I will clarify why this is the case later on in this video. Notice wherever you click within the Policy Explorer, you'll see a summary of that particular node. To see a summary of your project as a whole, simply click the project title above, which in our case is Untitled 1. The other 2 tabs, Model Verification and Access Privilege Preview, we will discuss in more detail during the testing and verification portion of this video. As you may have already noticed, there are these purple icons located above. These icons correlate exactly with the icons in the Policy Explorer. You can see here that by clicking this icon, you can begin defining a subject attribute. Or if I right click on this same icon in the Policy Explorer, I also can create a subject attribute. Looking further to the left near the top, you'll see these green icons, in which you can create a new project, open a previously saved project, import an XACML policy, and save your current project. Above that, you will find all these options once again within File and Project. One thing to take note of is by clicking Help and selecting About Security Policy Tool, you can quickly find out more about your current license. You can find important information like your license status, the start and end date of your license, how many times you've activated your license, and probably most importantly, you can verify that you are using the most recent version of Security Policy Tool, right here. So as of September 6th, 2017, the latest version of Security Policy Tool is version 1.0.2. Now I will show you step by step how to create attributes and attribute values. For our purposes today, we will use a healthcare example. To begin, we will first create a subject attribute. I will right click on subject, which prompts this message to appear, asking me to add a new subject attribute. After selecting the option, this screen will appear, in which I will be able to define the attribute. We are given the option to select our desired data type, and as you can see, there are several options. One thing to note is that Security Policy Tool does support all XACML 3.0 standard defined data types. And for our example today, we will use the string data type, and we will name it role. After naming it, we will get this new window pop up asking us to define the attribute values. Inside of this field here, you can actually define several attributes values at once. You'll just have to separate each value with a comma. For this video, let's define 3. So let's go with head nurse, midwife, and lastly nurse attendant. After entering those, we can click Add, which will add 3 separate attribute values that you can see in the Policy Explorer now on the left. Now I will create a resource attribute. Let's stick with string as our data type and name it patient records. Again, we will be prompted to enter in an attribute value, which we will add prescription. If you decide you want to enter more attribute values later on, you are always able to. All you need to do is right-click on the attribute and select Add New Attribute Value. So for example, let's add medical record and personal information as well. Now let's go back to subject and add another attribute. Let's name it department and define the values as emergency room and outpatient. Continuing down the Policy Explorer, you'll notice the next attribute type is action. However, action already has defined attribute values. If you remember earlier in this video, when I quickly touched on the summary window, this is why action already had numbers entered in the fields. By default, Security Policy Tool will add read and write as attribute values under action because multi-level security models require these specific values to be used effectively. However, we can still add our own attributes and attribute values as we would like for action. For example, let's stick with string and we'll name it nursing action. Then let's add create, write, and delete as our attribute values under nursing action. For time purposes, we've defined all the attributes that we will need for our policy. You'll notice that you can also define environment and condition and attributes to take your policy creation a step further to meet whatever your policy needs may be. Now that we've defined our attributes, let's take a look at inheritance relations. So you'll notice right away in the inheritance section that you have two options, one being subject inheritance and one being resource inheritance. They work the same, just one uses subject attributes and the other uses resource attributes. So for example today, we'll just show you an example of subject inheritance. To begin, we'll right-click on subject inheritance and click Add a Beneficiary. In this case, we'll put the beneficiary value as head nurse and have the inherited value be midwife. Now you can see in the Policy Explorer, head nurse is indeed inheriting midwife's access privileges, and this relationship is also being represented graphically to the right. What is unique with inheritance relations is you can add more beneficiary or inherited values by right-clicking Policy Explorer as usual, or you can add by right-clicking in the graphical area as well. So let's add another inherited value for head nurse from the graphical representation area and add outpatient. As you can see, whenever you add inheritance relations, it is dynamically reflected both in the Policy Explorer and graphical representation. Now let's look at how to create access control models. If you look here, you'll notice there are three options for creating models. They are ABAC, multi-level, and workflow. For time purposes in this video, we will just focus on creating an ABAC model. To begin, we will right-click on ABAC and we'll be prompted to add a new ABAC policy. After selecting this, the next thing we will do is enter an ABAC policy name, which we will call Nurse Attendant Policy. Then we will select the rule combination algorithm and policy enforcement algorithm. As you can see, there are several options based on whatever your policy needs are. For our example, we will just leave these as deny override and deny bias and select add. After clicking add, this new window will appear given this option to begin specifying the rules of our policy. You'll notice there are different sections such as selected subject attributes, selected resource attributes, selected action attributes, selected environment attributes, selected condition attributes, and lastly selected decision. Each of these sections is where you'll begin building your rule by selecting your desired attribute values. In each section, you'll also then define the decision of your rule, meaning should your enforcement system permit or deny the access request when the specific scenario arises. To begin, let's start with selected subject attributes. For our first rule, let's choose nurse attendant, and for our resource, we will pick prescription, and for action we will select create. As you may have noticed, all of the subject attributes, resource attributes, etc. that we've defined up to this point are available to choose during this rule creation process. Had we defined specific attributes for environment or condition, we would have those options as well. However, since we did not define specific environment or condition attributes, we'll just add the any environment and any condition to our rule. Lastly, we will choose our decision, which can be either permit or deny. And for example, today we will go with permit. Once we've verified everything is looking the way we want it, then simply we will select add and our rule will be generated. Now looking over to the policy explorer on our left, we can clearly see our policy that we've created, as well as a rule combination algorithm and policy enforcement algorithm that we chose. And of course, underneath that is the rule that we just created. To add another rule, we will simply click on our policy again, right click, and select add a new ABAC rule. We'll get the same window so that we can start building our rule. This time let's take a look at another one of our options that we didn't talk about last time. Whenever you create a rule, you are able to define if you'd like to use or and. The difference is when you select or, you will create several separate rules all at once. Whereas if you were to select and, you'll get one rule generated, but with the multiple attribute values that you defined. So let's show an example of the OR function. Suppose we would like to create a rule for the nurse attendant, midwife, and head nurse. Then just like last time, we'll choose the resource to be prescription and the action to be create. Again, we will select environment, any condition, and we'll leave it on permit and click add. So at times, Security Policy Tool will give you little helpful messages like this. The tool has actually noticed that we had attempted to create a duplicate rule, and so it has notified us that the duplicate rule will be discarded. After taking note of this, we can simply select OK and continue on. So now you will notice the additional rule in the Policy Explorer to our left. So similarly, you can create rules using the AND instead of the OR function. So again, we'll open up the window to define a new rule, but this time we will use AND instead of OR. For this example, let's choose outpatient and head nurse. Then for resource, we'll do prescription, again create for action, any environment, any condition, and permit. If it looks good, then we will click add. Now you will see instead of creating individual separate rules for the different subject attribute values, it created just one rule, but included the multiple attribute values we selected inside of it. Let's take a look at the summary window to see the details about our example policy. So right away we can see that it is an ABAC policy. We can see our policy name, which is nurse attendant policy. We can see the rule combination algorithm and the policy enforcement algorithm that we chose. We see the number of rules as well as the time created and the last time we modified it. In addition to that, it will even break down the rules we've created, so you can see all the subject attributes that we've included in our rules, all of the resources included in our rules, and so forth. One thing to note of this is that all the way to the right here is the inheritance relation. Since we did in fact define inheritance relations earlier, some rules were generated solely because of this. This is why you will see some rules as inherited and other rules as originated. Simply, the originated rules are rules that were created with no relation to our defined inheritance relationship from earlier. As you can see, Security Policy Tool makes it super easy to stay organized and to very smoothly create new access control models. For our final section of this video, we will talk about testing and verification. Now that we've created a simple policy, let's go test it. To do so, we will first need to define some access control security requirements to use to test against our policy. As you can see below, when it comes to the access control security requirements, we have three options. One being individual security requirement, one being separation of duty security requirement, and the third being combinatorial test suite. For our example today, let's focus solely on the individual security requirements. To begin, I will right-click on the individual security requirement and get the option to add a new security requirement schema. Basically what a schema means is just a group of individual security requirements. I'll click on this, which will give me the option to select a schema name. For example, let's name ours Nurse Attendant Schema. Once everything's looking good, we will select Add, and just like we did before when we were defining the rules for our policy, we will get essentially that same window. An easy way to think of individual security requirements is to think of them as just like rules, but rules that we use to test against our policy. So same as we did when we designed rules for our nurse attendant policy earlier, we are able to create several individual security requirements for our nurse attendant schema. So to begin, let's use the OR feature, and for subject we will include head nurse, midwife, nurse attendant, emergency room, and outpatient. Then for resource we will go with prescription, and then again for our action we'll do create and any environment, any condition. Again we will choose permit, look everything over, it's looking good, so then we will select add. Similarly, how we did with our policy before, we can actually click on individual security requirements to get a summary of them. So for our nurse attendant schema, we've created 5 individual security requirements. We can click on specific ones to learn a little bit more about them. So now everything's looking how we would like it. Let's go to model verification to begin testing our nurse attendant policy. One thing to note that sometimes depending on the size of your screen, you'll want to adjust the size of this larger panel. In this case, I'm going to make the model verification area a little bit bigger by moving this to the left. So right away after selecting model verification, we'll get 2 options. One is policy verification and the other is separation of duty. Policy verification is used in the cases that you've created either individual security requirements or using the combinatorial suite testing, whereas separation of duty is used only if you've created separation of duty requirements. Since in our example we are using solely the individual security requirements, we will just focus on policy verification. However many schemas you choose to create prior to testing, you will be able to select in the Choose Security Requirement area. Since we created just one nurse attendant schema, we'll just add that. And similarly, in the Choose policy, we do have our one policy, the nurse attendant policy. So we'll add that as well. You may have noticed that the Choose verification area has changed. Well, that is because as of right now, we've defined just one policy. By adding our one policy to this area, our only option becomes a single policy verification. So after we get everything looking how we would like, simply we will click the Run Verification button to the right, which will then generate our results. Here listed are all the verification results from our tests that we just completed. Listed are all the individual security requirements we created in our nurse attendant schema, and the corresponding results with them. You can click on specific security requirements, which will show you the policy rule against which the specific security requirement has been tested. As you can see here, this nurse attendant policy has a decision of permit, and then the security requirement also has a decision of permit. Thus, we get a verification result of true. Additionally, you can click below here on the policy to get a list of rules that matched with the specific security requirement. This area provides a very in-depth analysis of the results, so you can check for which rules your security requirement is true and why your security requirement is false. Then according to this tracking, you can make the necessary changes to your policy. And that's why Security Policy Tool allows you to not only enhance your access control security, but also save you time during policy development. So that last example was single policy verification. Let's create a second policy so we can try a different policy verification method. Let's create a new ABAC policy and name it Midwife Policy, and keep the rule combination algorithm and policy enforcement algorithm as they are, and select Add. Let's add our subject attributes midwife and resources, add prescription, medical record, and personal information. And then this time for action we'll do create and we will do write. And then again add these 2 and we will leave it on permit. After looking it over, it looks good. We'll click add and continue. So now we have our second policy created. Let's go back to model verification and do a new test. So just like earlier, we will select the one schema that we've defined, but now that we have multiple policies, we'll not only add the nurse attendant policy, but we will also add the new midwife policy. Also, something to note is that in the event that you are selecting all your policies, like we are in this case, you can always just choose select all, and then it'll include all of your policies, or for us, the 2 policies we've created. So as you can see, the choose verification area has changed now. Previously, in our last example, we saw that just single policy verification was our option to test. However, now we have more options to choose from. Now we can choose either merge policy or combine policy. When choosing merge policy, then we will need to specify our rule combination algorithm and enforcement algorithm. On the other hand, we can do a combine policy, in which we will just clarify the policy combination algorithm. For example, let's use the combine policy, and then for our policy combination algorithm, let's go with permit overrides. Now after seeing everything looking how we want it, again we will click this button here to run the verification and generate our new results. Just like before, our results are generated and can be analyzed in depth very easily. Again, you can select individual security requirements and find out which policy rules correspond with that, and then also dig a little deeper just like before. The final thing we'll look at in this introductory video is access privilege preview. With this feature, we can easily view the access privileges of any specific subject attribute or resource attribute. As you can see above right here, we have the option for subject access or resource access. Let's first take a look at subject access. For this example, let's choose head nurse and then our nurse attendant policy. Since we've only chosen one policy, we are given only the option to do single policy verification. Now that everything's looking how we want it, we will then run the verification, which will generate our results. Below you can see the security policy tool will automatically generate all the security requirements and attribute permutations that are related to head nurse in some way. This access privilege preview provides a good overview of the access status of specific subject or resource attributes. In our case, the head nurse attribute. So similarly with model verification that we used previously, we're able to select specific security requirements to get a better understanding of why we're getting the permit or deny results that we are seeing. Similarly with the resource access tab, you can select your resource attribute and a policy. One thing to note, for either subject access or resource access, you can select multiple attributes and multiple policies depending on your needs. For our example, once we have everything designed the way we want, then we will select run verification and generate our results. Thank you for watching our introductory video. Be on the lookout on our website, www.securitypolicytool.com, for additional videos in the future. Our future videos will take an even deeper look into Security Policy Tool. For example, some of the videos will feature our multi-level access control models, workflow models, separation of duties, security requirements, and our combinatorial test suite. If you haven't yet, go download our free demo and see for yourself why InfoBeyond is a leader in access control security. Thank you.